week we're talking about PRA, and my role this week is to talk about and summarize the different tools used in a PRA approach. In the manual, it talks about four different roles that a facilitator has in the success of PRA. Number one, introduce the activity. Number two, conduct the activity. Number three, close the activity. And number four, capture things on paper as quickly as possible. And so it talks about the need for all team members to take notes of everything and not just take notes on what they deem to be important. And I wanted to say those four things first because I think in order for a tool to be effective, it needs to be used properly. And so especially with number 1 and 4 on this list. So number 1 is introduce the activity. Without introducing the activity and setting it up correctly, you will not get very far and the community will not participate correctly. I think something of this importance isn't something that you can just get up and wing it or improvise. I think it takes a lot of prior planning and preparation to pull it off correctly. Number 4 on this list is also very important in making sure the tool is used effectively. So capturing everything on paper helps guard against what the manual calls memory bias, where we only remember the things that we're looking for. And so when we capture everything, oftentimes things will surface that we didn't expect to see, or that there are things that we weren't looking for. The first tool that I'm going to talk about in PRA is what is called participatory mapping. And this is very similar to another concept that I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with called asset mapping. And the key difference here in PRA versus RRA is who is constructing this participatory map and what tools are used to generate it. So instead of an outsider coming in and mapping the community itself is mapping the community. And in using a PRA approach to participatory mapping, we are allowing the community to generate the map without much feedback from the team. And this is really insightful for the team to watch this process go down, and because it'll shed some light on what the community values and what the community prioritizes. And the resources used to construct this map depend on the context. And so we at Neighbor to Neighbor have used a round table type setup with colored markers, pens, sticky notes, butcher paper, flip chart paper to really kind of facilitate this kind of discussion. And using objects that are easy to move and reposition, such as sticky notes, we found are really helpful because it's not permanent. So if something's in the wrong place, you can move it to where it really should be. And the team has generated a checklist, and this checklist really needs to be kind of kept in the background during this process, and it will help guide discussion once the community is done completing the map. There are different variations on this kind of mapping, and so you could do it on a neighborhood level, which is kind of where I'm coming at and what I'm thinking of first, or you could do it on a wider scale such as a city or a regional level. You could even do it on a much more personal level and do a family resource map. Social mapping is another form of this activity. Information found on this map includes much more sensitive data. In the manual, it describes things on this map could be, food security or families that have malnourished children as something that could go on these maps, and a few things in other contexts that I thought of that could also go on these maps are income, property values, types of residents, ethnicity, or level of public assistance. And obviously this information is much more personal and sensitive. The next tool is the transect walk, and this one is pretty self-explanatory as it utilizes people's ability to make observations. And I think one of the key things here, it seems pretty obvious, but one of the key things here is the concept of walking. And I think that's really important because when you walk versus drive, things really come alive and you notice things that you don't when you drive. And it also takes a lot more time to walk versus drive, and so it gives the community an opportunity to not just point out things, but to also really tell the story of particular places. And so in the manual, it suggests walking to the furthest point out and then leisurely walking back, which I think is a pretty good idea because it ensures that you will cover all necessary ground. This is a great opportunity for team members to be guided by members of the local community, to ask direct questions in the field, and to use the checklist as a guide to conversation. And if the team is large enough, it might be best to split up and go in different directions to cover more ground. And once the transect walk is completed, the information gathered should be transferred to a diagram and labeled accordingly. The next tool is the Venn diagram. And the Venn diagram is another way to map a community, but focuses more on social relationships rather than physical ones. It primarily looks at how a community is organized. And the team should, again, begin with a checklist of something that's really thought out, has a list of issues that they want to discuss. And to start this activity, a circle should be drawn, and anything that's on the inside of the circle signifies things that are internal to the community, and anything on the outside of the circle signifies something that is an external source of power or influence on the community. And so starting with the inside of the circle, all institutions and influential individuals should be shown. And there's a lot of different ways to really visually kind of represent these different things. And so it talks about using maybe different colored paper, different sizes, different shapes. And so different sizes can be used to signify the influence that an institution or an individual has. And different shapes can be used to differentiate between an institution and an individual that is influential. And so after the inside of the circle is filled in and correctly labeled, after that we start to really name and identify the external institutions and individuals that have power and influence on the community. And if it's deemed beneficial, some kind of mechanism to link the external institutions or individuals that have power and influence on the community, some kind of mechanism to link between the two could be really important, and you can show that as well. And once the diagram is complete, it's really important, especially with the Venn diagram, to debrief the exercise and really examine the diagram. Because a lot of times, like this really shows power dynamics, and a lot of times you don't really understand what's going on unless you visually see it. And once you visually see it, a lot of times more questions will come up from the community, or even questions from the team to the community will come up that you didn't kind of expect. And so one question that I am wrestling with that I would love your feedback on is this. It's kind of a bit of like a scenario in a question in a scenario. So if the field or community you are working in is actually your own, meaning you relocated to the community and have been there for a long period of time, pretty general. So the question is, would it be more beneficial at this point to conduct an RRA study versus a PRA study, because you are now arguably an insider? Because I think, I can argue that in this position, doing an RRA study, or really a hybrid of the two in this case, can be just as beneficial or more beneficial and more comprehensive and more effective than doing a strict PRA in this type of situation. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll type it out into Blackboard so you guys can read it, and I'll kind of clarify some things. And I look forward to hearing from you guys. Thank you.